Welcome to our webinar featuring Winter is Coming. What will that mean for your energy costs? I'm Mark Levine, and I'm the Executive Director of MEGA and the Deputy Director of the New York State Association of Counties. Today's webinar is hosted by MEGA, the Municipal Electric and Gas Alliance, to discuss the challenges and opportunities facing counties, local governments, and school districts in today's changing electric and gas marketplace. The goal of this webinar and of MEGA in general is to provide data and information designed to help municipalities make sound decisions about your energy procurement. This is part of the due diligence process that we encourage our members to make as you consider your choices. Our team of experts on today's webinar, they're not meteorologists, and winter is still a season away, but they know the global, national, and state energy market and all the factors that go into pricing. We appreciate them sharing their knowledge with us today. This is a great opportunity for you to ask questions from some of the best in the business. What you will hear today is how weather trends, along with supply and demand, are impacting the pricing that you see from your account representatives. But that's only part of the story. They will also delve into how our state and federal public policies are impacting the energy pricing we are seeing at home and at work in your government and school district. You'll get a sense of why and how bills are going up, even as energy pricing has somewhat stabilized in the past few months. As I was reminded this week by Rick Roberts from the village of Granville, our energy bills are going up at the same time that pension costs are going up, salaries are going up, insurance costs are going up, and the cost of construction and road projects are going up. Part of this is inflation and general economic conditions, and part of this is public policy in New York. But all of this is putting a squeeze on the 2024 budgets. That's why we are doing our best to help you stabilize the energy part of your spending plan. That's not easy if you're coming off fixed pricing that was locked in when rates were low and before the CLCPA, but there are options that will be discussed today that could help. Our team is here to work with you and help you plan for a future working with the energy policies that have started impacting pricing for all of us in New York State. Before we get started on the webinar, we have a few housekeeping announcements. Jeanette Stanziano is the NYSAC Director of Education and Training, and she's running this morning's webinar. Jeanette.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Just a couple of items to note before we begin. As we do with all of our webinars, we will be recording this program and we will post them on the NYSAC website probably a couple of hours after the program, both for the recording and a PDF of the slide deck. So please go to NYSAC, www.nysac.org to view this or share this with anyone in your county. We also encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the program. The way to do so is in writing. Just refer to your dashboard, click on questions, type those questions in, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Mark Levine will be moderating a brief Q&A session where those questions will be answered. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks. And we know that you have questions because I've been fielding questions. So if you have them, now's a good chance to ask our panel of experts. Britt Lyons is the principal in the Commodities Management Group at Constellation. She's our resident expert on the power and gas market and regulatory analytics. She supports regional deals in New York as well as deals spanning ISOs nationally where Constellation does business. Dan Murphy is a business development manager here in New York State for Constellation Energy. He's an experienced professional with over 30 years of work in energy and business development in both a regulated utility environment and within an energy services company. And finally, we have Karen Storm, who's a municipal procurement consultant. Karen is currently working as a consultant for the New York State Association of Counties. She previously worked for the Albany County for more than 37 years in the procurement office before retiring last year. She has agreed to help us at NYSAC and Mega customers as you look at your energy bills, and she can help you walk through comparing pricing from Mega and from other utility companies. That said, I would now turn it over to Britt Lyons. Britt?
Thank you. Good morning. So to kick things off, this first slide is a bit of a summary of some of the major factors that are impacting prices, both nationally and in New York. You'll notice the little arrows on the left-hand side, and those are really meant to indicate whether we view these particular factors as bullish, bearish, or neutral to price dynamics. You can see a combination of blue and green here, with blue representing fundamentals that we consider to be more neutral at this point in time, and green arrows representing fundamentals that are more bullish or have a greater upside price risk. The main thing I want to highlight here is that for the most part, the national fundamentals like natural gas supply and prices have been fairly neutral, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is and also how that might change. But you're probably wondering, well, why have my electricity rates moved higher? And a lot of that has to do with factors that specifically impact New York, most notably increases to what's referred to as the non-energy components that make up your total supply cost. So we'll look at what some of those things are as well. Weather is always going to be a major factor given it drives electricity and gas demand. This summer was pretty moderate in the east despite a fairly warm summer nationally. So we didn't see a big impact to energy prices in the index market. But that said, winter typically is the more risky period in the Northeast and New York in terms of volatility because of pipeline constraints and a growing reliance on gas-fired generation. So we'll take a look at expectations for this winter as well. This next slide is meant to illustrate why we're seeing some of the supply rates moving higher. Given today's time constraints, we won't be able to get into all of the non-energy components, but a key point to understand is this. Non-energy cost components like capacity, transmission, and other costs associated with the Clean Energy Standard and CLCPA have increased in the last year or so and are likely to continue increasing for the foreseeable future. These costs are passed on to retail suppliers like Constellation from the New York ISO, and retail suppliers like Constellation pass those on to customers. These costs are often not known in advance, at least beyond the current or upcoming year, and so there's little that can be done to manage them, and there's not a ton of strategy that can be implemented to manage these non-energy costs. That said, and you can see in the graphic on the top left-hand side, they're a factor in why we've seen overall prices move higher, and they absolutely should be considered for budgeting purposes. However, the component that makes up the largest portion of your total supply charges is energy. And so it's a critical component to understand and implement some strategy around. I think that Dan is going to cover some of the procurement and strategy piece later on in this presentation, but I want to provide some education today on the fundamentals that are driving the energy portion of your supply price, as well as where some of these prices have been trending. Before I advance to the next slide, I will just kind of note, if we look at a 24-month fixed price, like in this chart on the lower right-hand side, like I said, you can see overall costs have been moving higher, despite the fact that, in the natural gas market, we've seen prices pretty stable over the last couple of months. And a big reason for that, you can see in these pie chart graphics, is while the energy piece, which is kind of like the index rate that you would pay, has been more stable. We're seeing an increase in the non-energy components like capacity. We're seeing a lot of transmission projects being built out and updated. That's increasing transmission costs. RPS and other costs related to the clean energy standard continue to move higher. And so, really that's why we're seeing kind of overall an all-in fixed price move up, despite the fact that, it is a pretty good time right now to look at just that energy portion. So the portion of blue in this pie chart, which makes up the biggest portion of your supply cost, that's really the portion of your supply bill that you can implement some strategy around. Those other costs really tend to be, less material, whether you fix or pass those through. They are kind of costs that are passed along. And like I mentioned, there's not a lot of those that are known beyond, the current year or the next year. And so really taking a look at that blue portion is what's going to be important. If we look at this next slide, one of the big factors that drives energy prices is actually what's happening with the gas market. And that's because, of the generation mix in New York State, which includes nuclear, hydro, renewables, gas and dual fuel make up the largest percentage of electric generation in New York State. So what's happening in the gas market is a big driver of what's happening in the electric prices in New York State. You can see here that, we saw a tighter gas market push up prices substantially in 2022. But more recently, we've been in an oversupplied market, and that's helped keep a lid on prices so far this year. And you can kind of see that prices have traded sideways over the last few months here. This all despite a summer which made it into the top 10 and spurred record power burns because of heat that we saw in Texas and parts of the deep south. All that being said, regional gas prices in New York, like Transco, Zone 6 New York, Iroquois, Zone 2, they'll have a bigger impact and also see a lot more volatility in the winter in New York due to regional pipeline constraints. If we move to the next slide here, this is just a snapshot of what's going on with storage. And so one of the big factors in, where gas prices are has to do with the supply and demand balance. So despite the fact that we saw overall nationally a really warm summer, we've also seen really strong production over the last year or so. And so that's kind of enabled us to have pretty hardy reserves and underground storage. You can see in the chart on the left-hand side, this is looking at underground storage inventories over the last couple of years. Expectations for where we will end this injection season is right around 3.8 TCF. This, you can see in the chart, is quite a bit higher than where we ended last year, which was 3.6 TCF. And why this matters is, these are the inventories that are available during the winter and withdrawal season when gas demand is higher because of increased, gas burn with colder temperatures. If you look at the chart on the right-hand side, this is showing the correlation between prices in that orange dotted line versus where underground inventories are. So what you'll notice is if we're in a storage deficit, if we have less underground storage available than what we typically see, that'll cause an increase in prices like we saw in 2022. And when we have hardy storage levels or an oversupplied market, that pressures prices lower. This has been one of the more bearish factors this year for natural gas prices, and is part of why we saw prices, substantially lower this year than we did in 2022. One of the more bullish factors, or what could potentially become a more bullish factor, is around production. We've seen some pretty strong production numbers throughout 2023 this year, and that's really helped us get into the position we are with underground storage. You can see in the chart on the left-hand side, this is looking at production going back to 2020, as well as where the EIA forecasts production to be for the balance of this year and next year. The fact that we've seen production hanging on around 101, 102 BCF is really significant, and has helped us keep, strong underground inventories, despite the fact that we saw nationally a top 10 hottest summer. But that said, if you look at the chart on the lower right-hand side, this is looking at gas and oil rig counts. And you can see that we've seen really, really strong declines in particularly natural gas rig counts over the last few months. One thing that's important to note is there is a lag in, once these rigs decline, there's about a 4 to 6 month lag to when that really starts impacting production output. So when we look at the rigs falling off as much as they have in the last 6 months, we're now sort of hitting that time frame where we're going to start to see, or could start to see, the impact on actual production output, which is the effect of those rigs coming offline. Will start to show in what we're seeing with production. And you can actually see for September, production is declining. I don't know if anyone on their phone is hearing a little bit of feedback. Is in September, we actually started to see a decline in production output. And moving forward, what happens with production is going to be one of the most important factors to what drives gas prices moving forward. If we do start to see some of these production numbers coming off, given the fact that we're seeing more electrification, more increased natural gas demand, as well as an increase in LNG demand in the coming years, if we do see declines in production, that really could kind of turn the tables on what's been a pretty stable gas market and impact prices moving forward. The next slide that I just wanted to show more specifically to New York is the correlation between power and gas prices. And like I mentioned earlier, Henry Hub is the benchmark for natural gas in the United States. It's usually what you're hearing referred to when you hear like NYMEX gas prices. And you can see that yellow line here represents Henry Hub prices. That said, I mentioned that there are regional gas points in different states and locations that have a greater impact on electric prices. And for upstate New York, one of those is Iroquois Zone 2. I think I mentioned earlier that those prices tend to be more volatile in the winter due to regional pipeline constraints. They're more closely aligned with power prices in New York than Henry Hub is. One thing to consider is that we have yet to experience a significantly cold winter since the retirement of Indian Point nuclear unit a few years ago, which, by removing Indian Point and replacing it with gas-fired generation, you have a stronger reliance on gas. And so you can see kind of the correlation between power prices and Iroquois Zone 2 gas prices in this chart, and you can see how there's, tends to be more volatility in the winter. And so, this is one of those things where if we see sustained cold show up this winter, it can create a really volatile price environment, especially given the fact that we are seeing these changes in the generation landscape, and, gas is becoming an increasingly larger portion of the supply stack. So what are the expectations for this winter? We've been in an El Nino the last couple of months throughout the summer. Generally, the ENSO phase, which is what we refer to as the El Nino or La Nina, plays a really important role during the winter months. So being in a strong El Nino state, typically during an El Nino, the Pacific jet stream gets pushed further southward and steers an active storm track into California in the southern tier of the nation, which generally promotes warmer and drier weather further north. And you can see this in the map on the bottom right-hand side. That map shows that in a strong El Nino winter correlation, we see kind of warmer temperatures in the northern tier. That's probably what you'll see out in the market for the most part, is more moderate leaning forecasts, especially for the north with this strong El Nino. But if we do start to see the El Nino phase weaken a bit and enter more of a moderate phase, that could open the door for some colder weather to make its way into the pattern. But typically when we see a strong El Nino, we do see pretty mild winters for the most part, especially in that northern tier. Right now we're in the phase, the kind of temperature departures that we focus on most for the El Nino is the Nino 3.4. So right now we're about 1.7 degrees Celsius for a temperature departure. The biggest threat to the outcome of the El Nino is blocking. We've seen blocking show up in El Nino winters before, as well as the negative AO, which is the Arctic oscillation. If we do see that and some blocking around Greenland shows up, what it can do is buckle that jet stream that you see kind of in that graphic on the top left and push colder air down into the lower 48. While that's a possibility, it's difficult to forecast even a month in advance. It's typically something we see only a few weeks out. So, kind of in summary here, based on very early forecasts and the ENSO conditions being in a strong El Nino, we are looking at the likelihood of, a more moderate winter. But all that being said, if colder air or blocking does show up and even creates just a short but sustained pattern of, significantly below normal temperatures, that can create a lot of volatility in the market. And so it's definitely important to consider, in terms of protecting yourself from price volatility, having, something in place to protect against, colder temperatures should they show up. The last couple of slides that I have here are just looking at historic versus forward price trends. I selected two zones in New York that are both in upstate. So zone A is, in the west part of the state. It's out towards Buffalo. Zone A is a good benchmark for zones B, C, and even D and E to some extent. They have similar trends. And then zone F is the capital zone, so up near Albany. What these charts are showing is where actual energy or index prices came in the last 5 years. So that's what you see in these blue bars versus where they've come in to date so far in that yellow bar. And then, the green bars are showing where prices are forecast for the coming years. So a couple of things to note here is, given the market conditions and everything I just sort of talked about, there is some upside risk in the coming years, and expectations are that prices are moving higher. Some of that is based on, nationally, the gas market is expected to kind of rebound and supply to retighten, because of some of the items that I talked about with production, additionally growing demand for LNG exports. But the other big factor here is just changes that are going on in New York State. Right now, there's a big push towards, growing renewable generation. And there's a couple of factors where, that's going to have some shorter term upside price risk. One is that those resources are more intermittent. Two is that you need transmission build out to interconnect those resources, which changes some of the congestion congestion patterns in the state. You know, it's some of these factors that are kind of pushing those prices up, but I think it's important to look at, you know, historically where prices have been. 2020 being sort of the outlier there with COVID. I think it's unlikely, you know, we ever see prices kind of move down to that level. But you can see in 2022, we didn't even have an abnormally cold winter, but just the fundamentals of what was happening in the market really drove prices up. So again, you know, even though we kind of see an increase to prices in the coming years, this chart kind of shows where the risks are when volatility shows up. And again, 2022 wasn't a particularly cold winter that caused some of that upside in prices. If we went back further in these charts, you would see a similar line for like the polar vortex year, 2013, 2014, where prices came in really high relative to other years. So it's really protecting from some of that volatility. And then the last two slides here just look at futures pricing. Again, this is a selection for Zone A and Zone F, really just showing, you know, where prices are today for a couple of forward calendar strips versus, you know, this is a 3-year look back. So you can see, you know, that prices have moved higher since hitting record lows during the global pandemic back in 2020. We have seen near-term prices fall because of the oversupplied market, but longer-term prices are supported due to expectations for a tighter supply-demand fundamentals in the future. If we look at the Zone F chart, if we look at the Zone F chart here, you can see a little bit of a pullback too. And I think one of the key things to kind of note is this week over week, month over month, year over year change. When you start to see these, you know, moving in the red and you start to see an opportunity because prices pull back, it's a good time to look at doing something in terms of energy strategy. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan to cover his slides.
And thank you, Britt. It's Mark Levine again. And as we do this transition, I want to remind everybody on the call that this is a great time to think about and ask questions of our experts who are on the line now. Britt, you did a great job explaining the pricing and what goes into the pricing. So thank you very much. Dan's going to talk a little bit more on the ground of what's happening in New York with municipalities and that he's working with, and that the BDMs for Constellation on behalf of Mega are dealing with. And so I certainly have some questions. I'll keep those until the end, but if you have questions and you're on the webinar, please type them into your questions panel. Thank you. Dan.
There, I'm now unmuted. Let me just make sure my slides advance correctly. Yes, they're working. But again, well, thank you. First, thank you, NYSAC, for bringing us together today, and Mega. Britt, thank you. Every time Britt talks, I go away smarter, and it's just such a great experience. She's a rock star, so I've enjoyed listening to her. So this topic, this is a very serious topic. Just the title, Be Winter Ready, but it sends shivers down my spine, and especially myself, being an energy guy, you know, I think of winter and I think, oh, this is when things are going to get crazy. This is when prices go up, prices become volatile. My phone starts ringing saying, should we have fixed more? What should we do now? My budget's already halfway in the tank. You know, what are we going to do? And those are probably most of the customers that haven't listened to what we're going to be talking about in the next 10, 15 minutes. And with that time is a very precious commodity here. I'm going to move through the slides as quick as possible because I would much rather be interactive and listening to some questions and being able to just answer those questions directly. I think I do much better in person than feeling like I'm the man behind the curtain here advancing slides. When I first thought about this topic, you know, I started thinking about my customers and what they're dealing with. And I wanted to share the general theme around this is my customers who are really my best customers, I would think, really have these three common things that they all have in common. And those, and you'll see this as we move through this presentation, is there's a portion that's education. They have a lot of coordination and consensus building amongst their organization, and they have a plan. And you'll see this. I'll touch on this as we move through this this presentation. So just a real quick Constellation. I'm hopefully most everybody knows who Constellation is. Most people recognize us, especially in New York, because we have a large footprint with the hundreds or thousands of jobs or Constellation employees we have here in the state, operating the multiple nuclear units that we have. You know, and also just a rather small project, but something I'm really proud of. You know, at Constellation, right in Oswego, New York, we have the first hydrogen production facility in the world that works off of a nuclear reactor. We actually have people coming into Oswego from around the world to see this technology and how it's proving itself that you can actually produce hydrogen without burning fossil fuels. I'm extremely proud of it. It's very exciting, and it's happening right in our backyard. So Constellation is very committed to offering energy options to all of our customers. Have really embraced the moving to a carbon-free future. We're working with our customers on everything from the commodity, which you guys mostly know us about, but we're doing energy efficiency, data analytics, a lot of renewable solutions to help our partners reach their renewable goals. I wanted to just mention that. I think most people know Constellation, but we're certainly doing more and more in New York. Oh, there it is. As I mentioned, we're gonna focus on these three items. Now, Britt really did a great job of covering the educational component, because that is the gist of the educational understanding the markets. That's a big portion, and Britt did touch up on weather, some of the supply and demand fundamentals, the pricing trends. I'm going to touch a little bit more on some of the actual products that you can buy to maybe help you hit your goals, and we'll get into that. This is something that I did want to touch on. If any of you have sat down with me across the table, you might have heard my, it's somewhat comical line, but I'll throw out this handout and I'll say, you know, if in the next 5 minutes, you give me 5 minutes to review this one pager, I believe you will know more than 90% of anybody else in your same capacity that has to purchase energy on behalf of their organization. So obviously, I think this is extremely important information, you know, really boiled down. I tried to boil it down to one page. We update this quite often, and it also is different for each area of the state. So for example, what's in front of you right now is what's called Zone C. So you'll see at the top right, that's the blue section of the state. And just I'll just go through this real quick, as I mentioned, because I do think it is so extremely important. But this first chart, this pie chart, so much, you can learn so much from this pie chart. Britt touched upon it with the energy component being the biggest component. And then you have these other components that make up your whole price per kilowatt hour. And as we start talking a little bit later on, even into the energy products, it's good to think back to this graph of what really are we talking about. When we talk about energy, we're really just talking about that blue section. But when we talk about your kilowatt hour cost, we're talking about everything that goes into that. And that's also important because I know people are being solicited every day to have a new person come here and help manage your energy and trying to compare an apples to apples, like who is giving me a best deal. It's really good to go back to this pie chart and say, okay, you told me that my fixed price is, you know, this price. Is it a fixed price for all of the components, or is it just the energy component? Because so many times a fixed price, the devil's in the details, and you really got to understand what it is that you're buying. So you have to really know each component. So I refer back to this quite often. The next set of of graphs on the slide. Britt used the historical energy prices successfully in her presentation. And the one next to it, I find this to be very valuable. It gives us an idea of where we've gone from historical prices and where we are now. So the end of this would be basically that this was produced on the 20th. So you can see that big bump of 2022 had extremely high prices. You see where we are. I believe most of my customers even heard, I kind of had guessed it right around the second or third week of January, we hit a 15-month low. Most anybody who was within having to do something within this year probably heard from me around that time saying, you know, I don't know if it's going to go lower, but we are looking at a good buying opportunity right now. And I use this graph quite often. And this is just that graph again, where I've specifically for certain customers that are trying to even understand, why are my pricing for this renewal or this extension so much different than my existing deal? And you can show them, well, here's the date that you entered your existing deal, and here's the date to where we are today, and your extension is pretty much priced at where the today's prices are. So people are thinking, well, geez, that is a huge increase. I don't know if I can handle it. But at the same time, you could go back to the same, and if you think about it, well, you've had this price, this low price since this customer since March 2021, and here was the spots where you would have been paying 12 cents type for your energy, but you stayed locked in here. Now you're here, but now some customers are thinking, you know what, I don't think I want to go from where I was to where we are, and maybe I'll just take a little bit more chances going into the future. But it's all an individual choice. But I like putting it on a graph so people get a better idea of what's really happened historically. And then this chart to the left, I find this extremely important. A lot of people won't show you this, and hopefully it doesn't make things more confusing. But I like to take some of a lot of people don't understand really what a fixed price is. Like, what are we doing? I was actually at a legislative meeting in front of a county, and I had one of the legislators say, I think what you're doing is a bunch of hocus pocus. And it became an interesting topic to be standing in front of the entire legislature and trying to explain it's not hocus pocus. There actually is a very concrete way to develop what your fixed price is. And I think this graph is a stab to try to help people understand what we're actually doing when we give you a fixed price. So what this graph is showing, it's showing you what some of the future prices are right now, that where we can actually purchase power on your behalf and then deliver it to you in your monthly invoice over the term of your contract. And so this shows you where some of those future prices are, like where we're going out into those future markets. And so this is developed into pretty much 1 month buckets. When I actually do this, we actually have this developed into 1 hour buckets. So 24 times a day, I have modeled your energy out into the future. And we go out and we figure out how much we can buy that power for on the day that I basically give you a proposal. And when you execute it, we actually take that power and then deliver it to you over the term of the contract. Another thing that I like about this graph is some people ask, well, why does each delivery term have a different price? And this kind of helps explain that, because as we go out into the future, the price of power is different in each delivery term. So you'll see sometimes if we do a deal like a proposal that ends in December, well, then I'm not buying these really high price months of those January, February, March. And so it does make your price look lower. It is lower because we're not pre-purchasing out of the most highest cost months, where if we had that same proposal or contract end in March, now you have actually covered yourself for an entire winter. So you now have a fixed price over those highest price winter months, but it would make your fixed price higher than if I had just stopped in December. So I just wanted to take a minute there to kind of address the hocus pocus that goes into giving you a fixed price. There's really is, I don't think, any hocus pocus in it. And again, that just is my very quick spiel on some things that are really important. And obviously we could spend half an hour on each one of these graphs, but we're cruising through this presentation and we're going to be answering questions in just a little bit. So the energy supply products, very important, but probably not as big of a topic for this group. And I say that because of all the municipalities that I work with, and even let's say all the municipalities in the MEGA program, about 87% of those municipalities, not about 87 point, I believe it's 3% of those municipalities are purchasing a fixed price contract. And that is very popular amongst our municipalities because municipalities tend to put a premium and a value onto budgeting, and they want to know what their budget's going to be this year, next year, and into the future. They don't want to have to try to change things in the pot. Probably the remaining 13% that are not on a fixed price, we have a couple water sewer treatment plants that you can take a much more, they tend to be big energy users. Like they tend to use some off-peak power. So maybe we'll do something a little bit more sophisticated with that to try to, give them a budget with the fixed price, but then take a little bit sophisticated approach and say they can take some risk in order to possibly beat the budget. But again, I won't read through this entire slide, but a fixed price is what it sounds like. But again, thinking back to that pie chart, it's also important to think about, does this fixed price, is it a full fixed price? Is there certain things that are, for instance, in that pie chart that are not fixed? We did have, like a couple of years ago, we had a time when the state hit its peak. And later in the fall, where usually the state hits its peak in the summer. And so I have a lot of school districts that I work with, and normally school districts are not even in session when the state hits its peak. And so their capacity prices for a school district tend to be lower. But this specific year, they were in the first week of school, things were up and running. So they were looking at big increases in their total price per kilowatt hour because that capacity component for them had increased considerably. Well, in most of those school districts, they had educated themselves into what they could do. And we decided for at least the next year, we would not fix capacity, knowing that maybe the following year, the state would go back to where it historically hits its peak in the summer. So we didn't fix capacity. And in turn, that did pay off for them because then they were able to fix it the next year after the state hit its peak at a normal time when they were not even open, and it saved them money in the long run. But again, sophisticated approach, there's so many things we can do within each of these products. Index block solutions. This is similar to kind of what I just mentioned with the water sewer treatment plants. Like one that I'm thinking of, they did a lot of off-peak power, but during the on-peak, during the day is when the power prices get to be the highest, and they can really get out of sight. So what we did here is we ended up just fixing energy, but only for those hours that were on peak. And so we bought specific blocks of energy only to cover specific hours of the day, into the future, gave the fixed price for those. Then the rest of this plant's facility just worked off of an index or a market-based rate. But the market-based rates at nighttime and stuff are not as volatile, so they didn't feel they were taking a lot of risk on by doing that. And it was a concrete strategy for them. It worked for their needs. This is a popular program, and this is sort of pretty much like the block of energies that you can get. But with this, what we do, and there's probably a couple municipalities do this, is you can just say to me, you know what, we can't accept this high price of energy. I have a feeling that the future prices are going to go down, but at the same time, I don't want to risk everything. So how about we just fix a portion of our energy? And this is what I do through this program, our flexible index solutions program. You can actually take advantage of the forward markets or develop some risk aversion by purchasing just a percentage of what you're going to use in the future. So each of your invoices, when they come in, you'll see that price that we fixed the energy at, and that percentage of your kilowatt hour consumption would be fixed at that price, and then the remaining part would be on a market-based index rate. So very, very good program, very popular, especially amongst our business customers. So those, and I would say those are the most products, so we picked up the education part from Britt, understanding those energy markets, a little bit from me on that, on my favorite one pager. And then we went into the, just a couple of the energy products that are the most popular with that. And I'm going to take that breath now, absorb some of that, and now we'll move on to this coordination consensus and what I mean by that. And this, I think, is more important for a municipality than for anybody else. And you think about it is not to do this alone. You might have been given the job to go talk to the suppliers and figure out what to do for your next energy contract. But I'm really, the most successful customers is you don't have a single person. You've got a coordinated approach. You have consensus amongst all the players within your municipality. So, you think about who's involved in that. So you've got yourself, you've got somebody like me, I'm your energy supplier. We should include the utility company in these discussions. For example, some of the energy efficiency programs and such through the utilities are phenomenal. And it's also good to know who your utility contact is, because if you're going to close, let's say, close one of your barns or open something new, or are going to put solar on a rooftop, the utility has to be actively involved. And so know your contact. And then you've got your energy broker, your consultant. In this case, most of the time it's Mega, and with Mega we have Energy Next is another consultant that is brought to help with this, being part of your team to really help make these decisions come through. Again, you're not on your own. And I'm thinking it's hard when you have a white slide. I can't see how to go backwards. There we go. And then I'm going to jump into just having a plan, so get and also within your consensus is also to determine, who is on your team within that. So, you do have, let's say, the decision maker, the person who has to sign the agreement, they're obviously on your plan. Increasingly make sure your sustainability coordinator has buy-in from the very beginning, because we've had so many times too with municipalities where we think we have the price right, it's going to meet the budgetary goals, we're ready to move forward, and then things grind to the halt because people forgot to involve the sustainability coordinator and to understand what the coordinator's goals were and what that committee wanted to accomplish within their next energy plan. And then we end up having to back off and redo everything from the beginning. So, that person also is very important to have as part of your team. And then as far as having a plan, within a plan. So, how do we even know if we're doing the right thing as we're trying to buy this energy into the future? And you can't even say you were successful or not if you don't have a plan. So you're looking at what are we trying to accomplish? Why are we even talking to Dan, the energy company? Is it just about saving money? Are we going to try to reduce risk? Are we going to try to do more energy efficiency? Do we have a carbon goal? What is our budget going to be? Is this going to help us with that? And also what do we want out of a contract? Do we want real long-term stability? Do we want to just make sure we've taken care of the sewer treatment plant, but we're okay with that? What are we going to do with our lighting district? Have a plan, and then the roadmap, within your plan, the people who are on your team, you should have a roadmap to make sure you have those shared goals and those benchmarks. And, as I mentioned, making sure sustainability people are involved and budgetary people are involved, and the people who have to talk to the public are involved, because when it comes up at the town board meeting or the open meeting, when everything is shared, you can address any concern that happens to arise at the very last minute. And so, when it really comes down to, what is happening in these energy markets, the answer, it really depends on the day you're asking. I could almost give you a different answer depending on what day we happen to be talking. The critical point to take away is that energy markets, they've grown extremely volatile. Experts believe that volatility is here to stay. Commercial and industrial customers have been asking me where I think markets are heading. I think they're heading up, but I don't have special powers. I can't see the future. So when customers and prospects ask me where markets are heading, I generally advise them to stop trying to make the predictions and instead go back to the three basic areas. Ensure that you have clear objectives, get access to the energy market information. We put on what Britt does. This is so valuable. Set realistic budgetary operational goals based on clear and transparent information, and be prepared to move. Set up a process. I know it's very tough for municipalities, but be prepared to move and take advantage when the markets are in your favor. They really can help a person who can make decisions and move quickly, which obviously many municipalities are at a disadvantage. And a concern I have, considerably in a worker of mine, we're just discussing this the other day, is we have some people right now saying, no, the future 12-month price is much lower than the 24-month price. So you know what I'm going to do? We'll just do the 12, and then you let us know when the prices drop, and then we can just extend or put another year on the end of that. But unfortunately, most of these municipalities don't have a system in place where they can even move when that opportunity presents itself. So then we end up getting to the end of that 12-month, and we're right on, looking at a big increase for the next energy contract. So having a plan, outlining your needs, identify potential ways to save money or balance your risk will get you into the type of energy contract that works for you, and not just for a supplier. And I think it puts us on the right path. So to sum it up here, winter is coming. If you have been educated, if you've got a team in place, if you have a plan, you're ready for winter. You don't have to be as concerned about it. I think you'd be ready. And I think I'll kind of take a breath there. And actually, I do want to just mention on the Constellation website, or if you ask whoever your account manager is, we have lots of information available in white papers and such available to, if you don't want to just talk to us through. A lot of people like to read about the information first. A lot of information on our website. Our energy blog, simply sign up for it. You'll get the weekly email when new stuff has been put into the blog. We've got such fantastic people here writing papers and such that are being read all over the country at energy conferences and stuff. Incredibly talented people, like where we had earlier listened to Britt talk. And I will shut up here for a minute, and we can take some questions and talk some things through.
Thank you, Dan. Always a pleasure. Always learn something when you present. So I appreciate that very much. Before we go to questions, and I am getting some questions, so please hold on the line. I want to go to Karen Storm, our resident procurement expert. And Karen, please take a few minutes and explain what you do and some recommendations for the municipalities who are on the line today.
Okay, I'm here. I would like to thank Britt and Dan. What a great job you both have done on giving us some really good information. And it's one of the things that I can say that the education by your vendor is one of the best things you could possibly get. And when you're getting into the markets and you're starting to understand all of the technology, the terms, the conditions, if you don't have somebody who knows something about that kind of thing, you're really behind the 8 ball, and you can be really taken advantage of by some vendors who are not as ethical as some others. So with that being said, I thought Dan made a great point about having a plan and having a team in place to take advantage of the good pricing when it comes up. At Albany County, we had the Energy Advisory Group. And that group was given the ability by our county legislature to, when these, to lock in pricing whenever it became a good point in time for us to do that, working with our vendor. That has worked out very, very well. We have been able to save quite a bit of money by being able to have our vendor call us up, say, today's a good day to buy, it's a good moment. I would send the letter, say, yep, we're locking in our pricing, and we would go from there. So if you have that kind of team in place, you're already ahead of the game. I think another really important point, and I think Dan did mention this a little bit too, is knowing where you're going to be piggybacking from. If you're not going to be issuing your own solicitation and you're going to be piggybacking off of another municipality's RFP, obviously Mega has a lot of experience with Genesee County issuing these types of solicitations. And having NISAC being part of it really lends some credence to the whole process. And I will say that it does help when, if you're having an issue, whether it's with a salesperson or billing or whatever, it helps to have the backup being somebody here in New York who's helping run the entire program. It helps to have NISAC as someone to call and saying, you know what, I haven't been able to get this done. Can you help me out? So I really think it's important to know what you're piggybacking off of and who is in charge of that contract and where you can go when you need help. So I think that's a really important point that Dan brought up. I think moving forward, I think Mega's done a great job. We in Albany County use Mega for our natural gas. And we had these types of conversations with our vendors around budget certainty, because that was always so important to us. So I think, again, knowing who your vendor is, having a good rapport with your vendor, getting education from your vendor, it's very, very important. So with that, Mark, I know there's lots of questions. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks for your help and support, and for NISAC and for Mega customers. So I do have some questions. I'm going to get rolling. I know we're just over the hour mark, but we did get it started a little late. So I'm going to fire out some questions that we're getting. The first one is, do you produce your own supply, or is it purchased from the local utility?
Britt, did you want to take that, or did you want me?
Dan, why don't you take a shot, and if Britt wants to add on, she can do that.
No, so we don't necessarily. So what the way that it works is, when you think back to that graph when I was showing some of the forward prices, all generators have a forward market where they're willing to sell their future output, and then they post some prices, and how those are developed. So we're just one of the many generators that are in that mix. And so we're not necessarily relying upon our own supply. We would actually just be going to whoever has the cheapest supply available. There are times we do have so many customers these days who are looking at really long-term deals, especially throughout our New England states. And in those cases, we are using our own generation to back up deals, because really these forward energy markets, once you go past 48 months, there's really no one willing to sell that far in the future except for the nuclear power plants. But in the cases for the Mega customers, fixed prices would be made up of a mix of whoever's got the lowest prices available in the forward markets.
Anybody else want to add in? Okay. Do you, when purchasing from the utility, why are the numbers rounded up to charge more?
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally have my arms around that question. I don't. The numbers are rounded up to charge. Yeah, no, I don't really know what that question means. I'm sorry.
Rachel, if you want to restate the question, we will ask it right after this one. I understand what has been said here and appreciate that it's a tough market. However, the only offers that we are being given are 70% increase. If you saw a 70% increase in a large component of your budget, you would likely have to increase your prices. You have that luxury. Municipalities do not. We are living in a 2.5% increase world. There's a property tax cap on municipalities across New York. What options can you offer other than a 70% increase in the fixed pricing?
Oof. Well, that is, I mean, heartbreaking. I feel I did that type of situation, and again, I get the same thing from businesses who are still trying to keep things afloat, and they're looking at these huge jumps. But it comes down, if at this point, like, the planning hasn't been done to absorb the future higher energy cost, well, then it's are we going to now take risk in the hope that we get a lower priced in the forward index, market-based rates? So it's going to be a matter of, we can't stick to this budget that you're giving us with the fixed price. So the only real other option is you've got to make sure your energy efficiency is top notch, and make sure that you're still taking advantage of all the free dollars that are out there to help you with energy efficiency. And then you might have to say at the same time, we're willing to take the risk of the market-based rates. And when you do that, you might also want to make sure you have a really good understanding of where the market-based rates are. So for instance, if this customer with this question is in what's referred to as Zone F, Zone F is Zone F is the capital district. So you have everywhere from Albany all the way north through both Saratoga and Washington counties, and then it stops, at Clinton County. But that area, for instance, has some of the most volatile and highest prices in the state, outside of New York City. If you're in that area asking that question, I am really concerned for you, because not only are the fixed prices high, but then these index-based market prices, they can be so volatile where, we've seen 20-cent type numbers coming through. So if you're on a market-based rate, you can always jump into the New York State ISO website, and you can actually look at what both the day ahead and then the current prices are on the market base. And obviously that would be like a wholesale number, and it's the energy only, so it doesn't include all those other components that are in that pie chart that I showed you. But it'll give you an idea. There's going to be times where you'll see, geez, for everything we're doing today, we're going to be paying 25 cents a kilowatt hour. Can we not run the recycling center today? I mean, you're going to have to kind of start making those decisions. So I wish I had a feel-good answer to that, but it's a terrible situation.
How about riding the market through through December, January, February, and then locking in after that? Is that a possibility? And could that lower the fixed price? I know it's a little bit of a gamble, but is that a possibility, Dan?
Well, it's not a lower gamble, it's a huge gamble. So winter is just as the title of our presentation. Are you winter ready? And the reason you talk about winter, it's because that's when the prices are the most volatile, and they're the highest price. And again, we can talk about why, but this competition for natural gas, we want to use it to heat our homes, but we also need it to price electricity. So the winter is when the prices are extremely volatile and can really get out of control real quick. But to answer your question, yes, if I did not include those winter months in a forward fixed price, the price would be considerably lower. But what's interesting is this winter, we're actually looking at some pretty decent pricing, because right now the amount of natural gas and storage and such is at a really good number. But that strategy would give you the lower fixed price, and then you would just have to hold your breath for the January, February, March.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Dan.
Yep.
Hi, this is Britt. I just wanted to add to that is that, going back to a little bit of our discussion in the beginning, and again, it's so hard to address all of this information in a 1 hour period because really, you could spend an hour doing a deep dive into the non-energy components. But the second part of that, beyond what Dan just mentioned, is a big reason that an all-in fixed price is moving higher is because of some of those like non-energy components. And so just to put it in perspective, like there are transmission charges that are, now a new cost for supply that didn't exist several years ago, right? So we had, one line of projects called TOTS, it's Transmission Owner Transmission Solutions, that have been part of the supply charges for quite a few years. But some of these newer projects related to the public policy transmission at the, New York ISO, as well as interconnecting some of the new renewable build out, we're talking about billions of dollars in transmission projects that exist today that didn't exist 3 years ago. So, having a strategy for more of the energy piece and looking at some of that stuff is important, but some of the increase to price is related to these new kind of components that are coming down that didn't exist before due to new transmission build out and transmission upgrades. And, it doesn't make it, certainly, it's still a tough pill to swallow, but, a lot of these costs have to do with these new programs, tier 1 RECs. Eventually we're going to have offshore wind RECs, tier 4 RECs. These are new components that didn't exist maybe the last time you looked at contracting. And so that's another thing to consider.
Yeah, this is, as I mentioned, part of the CLCPA and the public policies that are driving up the pricing for energy, and it's not the cost of the energy as much as it is the other components of your energy bill, unfortunately. Thank you, Britt, and thank you, Dan. And back to the utility billing, I think this is specific to Constellation. So on our billing, they take the numbers from the utility and units are rounding up, causing a higher price when Constellation bills. Does that make sense now? Maybe that's part of the fixed price. I'm not sure.
No, it doesn't. It still doesn't make sense for me. I mean, one thing that we always pride ourselves on too, because not all energy suppliers do this. On your Constellation invoice, you will always be charged the same amount of kilowatt hours as what would be on your utility invoice. You have some suppliers that will charge you a different amount and say, oh, well, there was losses at the time, so we're going to charge you for more kilowatt hours that are not showing up on your utility bill. And of course, that makes their contract rate seem lower. But so no, I'm not sure again what that means by rounding up.
We'll follow up specifically with a question or two.
Yeah, I can certainly get on the phone with anybody and review.
Another question, so if you are buying the energy from the utility, is the energy purchased at a lower price than what is available to a municipality from the utility? So is Constellation buying the energy from the utility at a lower price than what the municipality would buy from the utility?
So first of all, we don't buy the energy from the utility. We would be going directly to, so if you're on like a market-based rate, we'd be going directly to the New York ISO who sets the clearing prices. So no, we wouldn't. We're big enough where we're a direct ISO going to them. And secondly, for the most part, as I mentioned, especially for municipalities, about 87.5% of them are choosing a fixed price. You are not able to do that through the utility. And that's where I think we provide a lot of value especially to the municipal customers and to our business customers, is being able to have the option to do some risk management and purchase your energy at the same time. And I do feel like that's where we bring the value in, because if you're just saying, okay, well, we're with NYSEG right now and we're purchasing just our energy. We don't want to fix anything. What value do we have for you? For the most part, I do see a spread in the prices that we're able to do, bottom line. But I think the real value that we provide to the municipal customers is in the idea of providing some other types of services, and with most importantly, the opportunity to do some risk management.
Great, thank you very much. And that also is another answer to the first question. So I want to thank our speakers today. I appreciate you taking the time and lending your expertise to educate our members. I appreciate it. And thank you all for attending today's webinar. It will be posted, it's being recorded. It will be posted on the NYSAC website later today. Thank you.